The notification arrived on Earth like a thunderbolt from another world. Ambassador Riley stared at the holographic message floating above her desk, reading it for the third time to make sure she understood correctly. The Galactic Council was inviting Earth to participate in something called the Interspecies Survival Championship. It was the first time such an event had been organized, and the prize made her heart race with excitement. Advanced terraforming technology and a permanent seat on the Council's inner circle. For a species that had only made contact with galactic civilization 5 years ago, this was an incredible opportunity. Earth had been treated like the new kid in school ever since first contact, always having to prove they belonged among the stars. This competition could change everything. The rules seemed simple enough. 12 species would each send their best representative to compete in various survival challenges on different worlds. The environments would test every aspect of survival skills, from extreme heat to crushing depths, from toxic atmospheres to frozen wastelands. Each competitor would represent not just themselves, but their entire civilization's approach to problem-solving and adaptation. Riley called an emergency meeting with Earth's top survival experts. Military personnel, Arctic researchers, desert specialists, and wilderness guides all gathered in the secure conference room. The debate was intense. Who could possibly represent humanity against alien species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years? Tom Bradley raised his hand from the back of the room. He was quiet most of the time, letting others do the talking, but when he spoke, people listened. He had spent 15 years studying survival techniques in Alaska's most remote regions. He knew how to find food in places where nothing seemed to grow. He could build shelter from materials others would ignore. Most importantly, he understood that survival was not about fighting nature, but working with it. The other candidates were impressive. Former Special Forces soldiers with decades of combat experience. Scientists who had survived research missions in Antarctica and the Sahara. Engineers who could build complex equipment from spare parts. But something about Tom's calm confidence made Riley pay attention. When asked why he wanted to represent Earth, Tom's answer was simple. He said that humans had been surviving on a difficult planet for thousands of years. While other species developed advanced technology to overcome challenges, humans learned to adapt. They learned to work with their environment instead of against it. That knowledge, passed down through generations, was Earth's greatest strength. The selection committee chose Tom, and within a week, he was aboard a transport ship heading to the competition site. The journey gave him time to study the other competitors, and what he saw was both impressive and intimidating. The Vorthak representative was covered in thick scales and could withstand temperatures that would kill a human instantly. Their home world was a desert planet where water was precious, so they had evolved incredible efficiency in resource management. Their technology was equally impressive, with devices that could extract moisture from the air and generators that ran on solar power. The Quell competitor looked like a walking crystal sculpture. Their species could manipulate energy fields and had no need for traditional shelter or food. They absorbed radiation directly from stars and could create protective barriers from pure energy. The very air around them seemed to shimmer with power. The Zephyrins worked as a collective mind. 3 individuals acted as one, sharing thoughts and coordinating perfectly. They had built an empire spanning dozens of star systems through flawless organization and planning. Their technology integrated seamlessly with their biology, giving them capabilities that seemed almost magical. Other species brought their own advantages. The aquatic depths could survive in any liquid environment. The insectoid builders could construct complex structures in hours. The energy-based flux could survive in the vacuum of space itself. Each one had evolved on worlds that would be instantly lethal to humans. Tom felt very small and very primitive as he watched these beings demonstrate their abilities during the pre-competition briefing. The Vorthak representative created a water extractor from basic materials in minutes. The Quell formed an energy shield that could stop projectiles. The Zephyrins built a communication network that connected all their devices instantly. When it was Tom's turn to demonstrate human capabilities, he felt the weight of every eye in the room. He pulled out a simple knife, some cord, and a piece of flint. With these basic tools, he started a fire, built a basic trap, and showed how to signal for rescue using smoke. The other competitors watched with what seemed like polite disinterest. Some even appeared amused. The Galactic Council officials explained that the first challenge would take place on Frost 7, a world of perpetual winter where temperatures dropped, far below what most species could survive. Each competitor would be given basic supplies and dropped into the wilderness. They would have 72 hours to survive using whatever methods they chose. Advanced medical teams would monitor everyone's vital signs, and emergency extraction was available if anyone's life was in serious danger. The goal was not to risk lives, but to test the limits of each species' survival capabilities. The winner would be determined not just by who survived, but by how well they thrived in the harsh conditions. As the transport approached Frost 7, Tom looked out at the frozen world below. Ice covered everything as far as the eye could see. Wind whipped across the surface, creating storms that would challenge even the most advanced technology. The other competitors were checking their equipment, running diagnostics on their devices, and making final preparations. Tom simply closed his eyes and remembered his grandfather's words from years ago. "Nature is not your enemy, boy. She's just testing whether you're smart enough to listen." He thought about the Inuit hunters who had survived in similar conditions for thousands of years. He remembered the techniques passed down through generations of Arctic peoples. Most importantly, he thought about snow. The other competitors saw snow as an obstacle to overcome. Tom saw it as a building material, insulation, and even a source of water. While they prepared to fight against the cold, he prepared to work with it. The competition was about to begin, and Earth's representative was ready to show the galaxy what human ingenuity could accomplish. The transport pods hit the surface of Frost 7 with thuds that echoed across the empty ice plains. Tom felt the bone-deep cold seep through the pod's walls immediately. Even before the door opened, he could hear the wind howling outside like a living thing. The sound reminded him of winter nights in Alaska, but this was different. This cold had teeth. His pod door hissed open, and the Arctic air hit him like a physical blow. The temperature readings on his suit showed minus 40 degrees, and dropping. The wind was strong enough to knock a person over, carrying ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. Most humans would panic in conditions like this, but Tom had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Around him, the other competitors were emerging from their own pods with much more confidence. The Vorthak representative immediately began unpacking what looked like a portable building. Sections of metal and plastic connected together with mechanical precision, and within minutes, a gleaming shelter stood on the ice. Internal heaters hummed to life, and warm light glowed through transparent walls. The Quell competitor needed no such preparation. Energy crackled around their crystalline body as they formed a shimmering barrier against the wind. The barrier pulsed with heat, melting snow in a perfect circle around them. They stood in their own personal warm zone, completely protected from the elements. The three Zephyrins worked with the efficiency that made their species famous throughout the galaxy. One gathered materials while another assembled components, and the third coordinated their efforts. Their shelter rose from the ground, like something grown rather than built, with curved walls that channeled wind away and surfaces that absorbed and stored solar energy. Other competitors deployed their own impressive solutions. The aquatic depths created a heated pool using chemical reactions. The builders constructed a complex geometric shelter that seemed to defy physics. The energy-based flux simply absorbed the thermal radiation around them and converted it to warmth. Tom watched all of this activity while doing something that seemed almost embarrassingly simple. He was studying the snow. He picked up handfuls, examined the crystals, tested how it packed together. He walked in a slow circle, feeling how the ground lay beneath the white surface. To the other competitors, he looked like he was wasting precious time. The first few hours passed quickly. The alien competitors settled into their shelters, confident in their technology and abilities. Status reports came in regularly, showing all systems functioning normally. The Galactic Council observers were impressed by the variety of solutions and the efficiency with which they had been implemented. Tom was still working with snow. He had found a slight depression in the ground, sheltered from the worst of the wind. Using his knife, he began cutting blocks of snow from the surrounding area. Each block was the same size, cut at precise angles that seemed random but followed a pattern he had learned years ago from an old Inuit hunter named Paul. The snow on Frost 7 was different from Earth snow, but the principles remained the same. The wind and cold had compressed it into a material that was both strong and insulating. If he cut the blocks correctly and stacked them properly, they would form a structure stronger than most building materials. The other competitors occasionally glanced in his direction, and he could sense their amusement. The primitive human was playing with snow while they enjoyed climate-controlled comfort in their advanced shelters. Some of them even commented to each other about the quaint simplicity of human approaches to complex problems. As night fell on Frost 7, the temperature dropped even further. The planet's thin atmosphere provided no protection from the heat radiating away into space, and the perpetual winter meant no solar warming during daylight hours. This was when the real test would begin. The first problem started with the Vorthak, shelter. Their heating system, designed for their desert homeworld, was not prepared for the extreme energy requirements of Frost 7's cold. The heaters worked harder and harder, draining power from the batteries faster than expected. Warning lights began flashing as energy reserves dropped below safe levels. The Quell competitor found that maintaining their energy barrier required constant concentration. The cold was not just physical temperature, but something that seemed to drain their natural energy reserves. The barrier flickered and weakened as they struggled to maintain the warming field that kept them alive. Even the efficient Zephyrins discovered that their perfect coordination was being affected by the extreme cold. Their biological communication systems, evolved for their temperate homeworld, began to slow down in the frigid conditions. Their shelter remained functional, but their ability to work together was compromised. Other competitors faced similar challenges. The chemical reactions that powered the depth's heated pool began to slow down in the cold. The builders found that their geometric shelter, while beautiful, had gaps that allowed heat to escape. The flux discovered that thermal radiation was scarce in this frozen wasteland. Tom continued working on his structure. By now, it was clearly recognizable as some kind of dome. The blocks were arranged in a spiral pattern, each one carefully placed to support the others. The dome grew higher with each layer, and Tom worked from the inside, fitting each piece into place with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. The wind howled around the various shelters, but it seemed to flow smoothly over Tom's dome. The curved shape offered no flat surfaces for the wind to grab, and the construction technique distributed the force evenly across the entire structure. Snow began to drift against the other shelters, but it slid off Tom's dome like water. As the night wore on, status reports from the alien competitors became less optimistic. Power levels were dropping faster than expected. Heating systems were working at maximum capacity. Several competitors reported difficulty maintaining their shelter systems in conditions more extreme than anticipated. The Galactic Council observers watched with growing concern. This was supposed to be a challenging but manageable test. The extreme conditions on Frost 7 were pushing even advanced alien technology to its limits. They began to discuss whether emergency evacuations might be necessary. Through it all, Tom worked steadily on his dome. He had no heating system to drain power. He had no energy barriers to maintain. He had no complex technology to malfunction in the cold. He had only knowledge passed down through generations of humans who had learned to survive in places where survival seemed impossible. As he placed the final capstone block at the top of his dome, Tom smiled. The structure was complete, and the real test was about to begin. While the other competitors fought against the cold with their technology, he had built something that worked with the cold, using it as an ally rather than an enemy. The temperature continued to drop, and the wind continued to howl, but inside his dome of snow, Tom was about to demonstrate something that would astonish the watching galaxy. Tom crawled through the small entrance tunnel he had built into his snow dome and sealed it behind him with a carefully fitted block. The sudden silence was startling after hours of howling wind. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, but inside his creation, the air was still and quiet. He pulled out a small device from his pack, something so simple that the other competitors would have dismissed it as worthless. It was just a candle made from animal fat and plant fiber, the kind of thing humans had been using for thousands of years. He lit it with his flint and steel, and the tiny flame cast dancing shadows on the curved walls of compressed snow. The Galactic Council observers monitoring his vital signs noticed something strange. While every other competitor was showing signs of stress from the cold, Tom's readings were actually improving. His body temperature was stabilizing, his heart rate was decreasing, and his stress hormones were dropping to normal levels. The secret lay in the physics of his construction. Snow, when properly utilized, was one of nature's best insulators. The dome shape distributed structural stress evenly, making it incredibly strong despite being built from what appeared to be powder. The small entrance tunnel created an airlock effect, trapping warm air inside while keeping cold air out. Most importantly, Tom understood something that the advanced alien civilizations had forgotten in their rush toward technological solutions. Heat did not need to come from complex machines or energy fields. It came from understanding how thermal dynamics worked in natural systems. The candle flame warmed the air which rose to the top of the dome. The curved walls reflected that warm air back down, creating a circulation pattern that heated the entire interior. The snow walls absorbed the heat slowly, creating thermal mass that would hold warmth for hours. Within 30 minutes of lighting his simple candle, the temperature inside Tom's dome had risen to a comfortable 20 degrees. Outside, the alien competitors were facing their first real crisis. The Vorthak shelter was consuming power at an unsustainable rate. Their heating system, designed for efficiency in moderate conditions, was working at maximum capacity just to maintain a temperature barely above freezing. Worse, the extreme cold was affecting the battery chemistry, reducing their power storage capacity with each passing hour. The Vorthak representative made increasingly desperate adjustments to their systems, trying to balance heat output with power consumption. They reduced the heated area, focusing warmth only on essential systems. They lowered the target temperature, accepting discomfort in exchange for longer operational time. Nothing was working. The mathematics were simple and brutal. At current consumption rates, their power would be exhausted before the competition ended. The Quell competitor was discovering that their energy manipulation abilities had limits they had never encountered before. Their homeworld orbited close to a massive star, providing abundant energy for their natural processes. On Frost 7, energy was scarce, and maintaining their protective barrier was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The crystalline being tried to optimize their energy usage, creating smaller barriers, reducing the warming field, conserving power wherever possible. But the cold seemed to seep through every gap, requiring constant energy expenditure just to prevent their crystalline structure from becoming brittle and fracturing. The three Zephyrins faced a different but equally serious problem. Their collective consciousness depended on biological communication systems that were evolved for their species' temperate homeworld. The extreme cold was slowing their neural processes, creating delays in their shared thoughts and coordination. What had been perfect unity was becoming confused discord. One would start a task while another was still completing a related action. Their efficient coordination became clumsy overlap. Their shared shelter remained functional, but their ability to maintain and improve it was compromised with each degree the temperature dropped. Other competitors faced similar cascading failures. The depths found their heated pool was losing thermal energy faster than their chemical reactions could replace it. The builders discovered that their geometric perfection created thermal bridges that conducted heat away from their shelter. The Flux were learning that in a world with minimal thermal radiation, their energy conversion abilities were nearly useless. Emergency signals began appearing on the Council observers' monitoring systems. Not immediate life threats, but concerning trends that suggested several competitors might not survive the full 72-hour challenge. Medical teams were placed on standby, and evacuation protocols were reviewed. Tom was completely unaware of the crisis developing around him. Inside his dome, he was comfortable enough to remove his outer jacket. The air was warm and dry, heated by nothing more complex than a candle flame and the thermal properties of properly arranged snow. He ate a simple meal of dried food and melted snow for water, using a small metal cup heated by the candle. The monitoring equipment showed his vital signs as completely normal. His shelter required no power, no maintenance, no complex systems. That could fail. The dome would actually become stronger as more snow drifted against it, adding insulation and structural support. The design was self-improving rather than self-consuming. As Tom settled in for the night, wrapped in his sleeping bag and comfortable in his snow dome, the other competitors were fighting for survival. The advanced technology that had carried their species to the stars was failing them in the face of simple, brutal cold. The irony was not lost on the Council observers. The species they had considered the most primitive, the newcomers who had barely begun to explore beyond their own solar system, had created the most effective shelter using the most basic materials. While others deployed energy weapons and starship technology, the human had succeeded with knowledge that predated written history. The Vorthak representative made the difficult decision to activate emergency power reserves, knowing this would reduce their operational time even further. The Quell began to allow their protective barrier to fluctuate, accepting periodic exposure to cold in order to conserve energy. The Zephyrins struggled to maintain coordination as their collective consciousness was fragmented by the cold. Through the night, as the temperature dropped to levels that challenged even the most advanced technology, Tom slept peacefully in his dome. The candle burned steadily, the warm air circulated naturally, and the snow walls held their heat like a battery made of ice. His simple shelter was not just surviving the conditions that were defeating advanced alien technology, it was thriving when Morning came and Tom emerged from his dome, stretching and refreshed after a good night's sleep. The other competitors looked at him with something approaching disbelief. Steam rose from the entrance of his shelter, visible proof that inside his construction of snow and ice, the temperature was warm enough for water to evaporate. The human had not just survived the first night of the challenge. He had been comfortable, while doing it, using nothing more than materials found on the ground and knowledge passed down through generations of his ancestors. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the oldest solutions were also the best ones. Dawn on Frost 7 brought no warmth from the distant sun, but it did bring clarity to the desperate situation facing most of the competitors. Tom emerged from his snow dome to find several alien shelters showing obvious signs of distress. Ice had formed on the outside of the Vorthak structure where heat was leaking through inadequate insulation. The Quell's energy barrier flickered weakly, barely maintaining a protective field. The Zephyrins moved with the sluggish uncertainty of beings whose perfect coordination had been shattered by the cold. Tom walked slowly around the competition area, assessing the situation with the calm attention of someone who had seen survival situations before. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air, but his movements were steady and purposeful. While the other competitors huddled in their failing shelters, he appeared comfortable and alert. The Vorthak representative watched through their shelter's viewing port as the human moved around outside. How was this possible? Their own advanced technology was failing, their power reserves were critically low, and their heating system was consuming energy faster than they could afford. Yet this primitive being walked around as if the deadly cold was merely inconvenient. Weather. Through their communication systems, the alien competitors began sharing information about their situations. The reports were universally grim. Power levels were dropping across all technological solutions. Energy reserves were being consumed faster than anticipated. Several competitors were showing early signs of hypothermia despite their advanced equipment. The depths had been forced to reduce the temperature of their heated pool to conserve the chemical reactions that powered it. The builders discovered that their geometric shelter, while structurally sound, was losing heat through thermal bridges they had not anticipated. The Flux found themselves in a deadly feedback loop, expending more energy to gather the thermal radiation they needed to survive. Most concerning were the reports from the medical monitoring teams. While Tom's vital signs remained stable and healthy, several other competitors were showing stress indicators that suggested they might not survive the full challenge period. Emergency evacuation protocols were being prepared, though using them would mean automatic disqualification from the competition. Tom completed his circuit of the area and made a decision that would have surprised anyone who thought they understood how competition worked. Instead of returning to his warm shelter to conserve his own energy, he approached the Vorthak structure. He knocked on the wall panels, a simple sound that somehow carried through the howling wind. The Vorthak representative opened a small viewing port, expecting to see a frozen human begging for rescue. Instead, they found Tom standing calmly in the snow, apparently unaffected by the killing cold. When he spoke, his words created a cloud of vapor that proved the air around him was actually warmer than the outside temperature. "Your heating system is working too hard," Tom said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "You're fighting the cold instead of working with it. Let me show you something that might help." The Vorthak's first instinct was to refuse. Their species had mastered desert survival on one of the harshest worlds in the galaxy. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. What could this primitive being possibly teach them? But their power reserves were down to 18 hours at current consumption rates. Pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. Tom guided them through a simple modification to their shelter. using snow as additional insulation around the base and sides of their structure. They could reduce heat loss dramatically. He showed them how to create a small entrance tunnel, similar to his own, that would prevent warm air from escaping every time they opened their door. Most importantly, he explained the concept of thermal mass. Their heating system was trying to warm the air inside their shelter, but air was a poor holder of heat. By placing containers of water near their heaters, they could store thermal energy more efficiently. The water would absorb heat when the system was running and release it slowly when the system cycled off. The modifications were simple, using materials available in their immediate environment. Within 2 hours, the Vorthak shelter's power consumption had dropped by 30% while actually maintaining a more comfortable internal temperature. The representatives stared at their power readings in amazement, then looked out at the human who was already walking toward the next struggling competitor. Tom's next stop was the Quell competitor, whose energy barrier was barely maintaining a protective field. The crystalline being was surprised when the human approached, especially since he seemed to be radiating heat in a way that made no scientific sense for such a primitive creature. "Energy barriers work great when you have abundant power," Tom said, studying the flickering field. "But you're trying to heat empty space. Let me show you how to make your energy more efficient." He helped the Quell create a simple windbreak, using chunks of ice and snow. The barrier no longer had to fight against the constant wind, reducing the energy required to maintain it by half. He showed them how to create a smaller, more concentrated warming field by building walls that would contain and reflect the heat. The technique was so simple that the Quell initially dismissed it as beneath their consideration. But when their energy expenditure dropped significantly while their comfort level increased, they began to understand that the humans' knowledge was based on principles their advanced civilization had somehow overlooked. Tom continued his circuit, offering help to each struggling competitor. He showed the Zephyrins how to create backup communication methods using simple signals that would work even when their biological systems were slowed by cold. He helped the Depths improve the insulation around their heated pool using available materials. He guided the builders in modifying their geometric shelter to eliminate the thermal bridges that were draining their heat. Each solution was elegantly simple, using basic physics and materials science rather than advanced technology. More importantly, each solution worked immediately and reliably, requiring no power source or complex maintenance. The other competitors began to realize something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about civilization and progress. The humans' methods were not primitive alternatives to proper technology. They were sophisticated applications of natural principles that their own advanced societies had forgotten in their rush toward technological solutions. As the second day progressed, the gap between Tom's success and the others' struggles became impossible to ignore. While they had stabilized their situations with his help, they were still consuming resources and energy at unsustainable rates. Tom, meanwhile, returned to his snow dome each evening to warmth and comfort that required nothing more than a simple candle. The Galactic Council observers watched these developments with growing amazement. The competition had been designed to test each species' survival capabilities, but it was revealing something unexpected about the nature of intelligence itself. The most technologically advanced species were being taught fundamental lessons by representatives of a civilization that had barely achieved interstellar travel. That evening, as Tom settled into his warm dome for another comfortable night, the other competitors huddled in their improved but still struggling shelters. They had learned important lessons about survival, but more importantly, they had learned something about the species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers to galactic society. The human had not just survived conditions that challenged their advanced technology. He had thrived in those conditions while freely sharing the knowledge that made his success possible. In a competition where individual victory was the goal, he had chosen to help his rivals rather than watch them fail. This behavior puzzled many of the alien observers. In their societies, competition meant using every advantage to ensure victory over opponents. But humans, apparently, had evolved a different understanding of what strength meant. Tom's willingness to help others did not make him weaker. Somehow, it made him stronger. The final day of the challenge dawned with the same bitter cold that had tested every competitor's limits. But the atmosphere around the competition site had changed completely. Where there had been confidence and barely concealed contempt for the primitive human, there was now something approaching reverence. Tom emerged from his snow dome for the third consecutive morning, stretching and moving with the easy comfort of someone who had spent the night in a heated building rather than surviving in a frozen wasteland. Steam continued to rise from his shelter's entrance, a visible reminder that inside his construction of snow and ice, the temperature remained a comfortable 20 degrees above zero. The other competitors, despite the improvements Tom had helped them implement, were still fighting for survival against conditions that pushed their technology and biology to breaking points. The Galactic Council representatives had spent the night in heated debate about what they were witnessing. This competition had been designed to showcase the survival capabilities of different species, but it was revealing something far more profound about the nature of intelligence and adaptation. The human success was not just individual achievement. It represented a completely different approach to problem solving that their advanced civilizations had somehow lost. Council Leader Prime observed the scene through multiple monitoring systems, watching as Tom performed his morning routine with casual efficiency. The human melted snow for drinking water using the residual heat from his shelter. He prepared a simple meal using dried foods that required no cooking or complex preparation. He maintained his equipment with basic tools, checking and adjusting his simple systems with the practiced ease of someone who understood exactly how everything worked. Compare this to the alien competitors who were running constant diagnostics on failing systems, making emergency repairs to complex equipment, and calculating power reserves with growing desperation. Their advanced technology required constant attention and maintenance, consuming mental and physical energy that should have been available for other survival tasks. The Vorthak representative had managed to extend their power reserves using Tom's suggestions, but they were still facing systematic failures as the extreme cold affected electronic components in ways their desert world engineering had never anticipated. The Quell's energy manipulation abilities were severely compromised by the lack of ambient thermal radiation, forcing them to rely increasingly on the simple windbreaks and insulation techniques the human had taught them. Even the highly organized Zephyrins found their collective consciousness fragmented by conditions their biology had never evolved to handle. Their backup communication methods, learned from Tom, were keeping them functional, but they were a pale shadow of their normal coordinated efficiency. As the day progressed, emergency evacuation became necessary for two competitors whose life signs had reached critical levels. The Flux, whose energy-based physiology required thermal radiation to survive, was extracted after their core temperature dropped to dangerous levels. One of the builders was removed when hypothermia began affecting their motor functions despite their geometric shelter. The medical teams worked efficiently, but each evacuation served as a stark reminder of just how challenging these conditions were for species that had evolved on worlds very different from Frost 7. Only the humans seemed genuinely adapted to this environment, not through biological evolution, but through cultural knowledge passed down through generations of ancestors who had survived similar conditions. Tom spent the final day doing something that amazed the council observers even more than his survival skills. He was teaching. Moving from shelter to shelter, he continued sharing knowledge with competitors who were technically his rivals. He showed them advanced techniques for conserving body heat, methods for creating tools from available materials, and strategies for maintaining mental clarity in extreme conditions. The Vorthak learned how human ancestors had survived desert, conditions using techniques that complemented rather than replaced their natural abilities. The Zephyrins discovered communication methods that worked even when biological systems were compromised. The Depths found ways to extend their chemical heating reactions using principles of thermal dynamics that their aquatic evolution had never required them to develop. Each lesson was freely given, with no expectation of return or advantage. Tom seemed genuinely concerned for the welfare of beings who had initially dismissed him as primitive and inferior. This behavior was so contrary to competitive instincts that many council members struggled to understand the humans' motivations. As the 72-hour mark approached, the results of the challenge were undeniable. Tom had not just survived conditions that had defeated advanced alien technology, he had thrived in those conditions while helping others do the same. His snow dome stood as solid and warm as it had from the first night, requiring no maintenance, consuming no power, and actually improving its insulation as more snow drifted against its curved walls. The final measurements were almost embarrassing for the other species. While their shelters showed clear signs of stress and deterioration, Tom's dome was structurally sound and thermally efficient. His vital signs remained stable throughout the entire challenge. His resource consumption was minimal. His stress indicators were actually lower than they had been before the competition began. Most remarkably, he had achieved all of this while expending significant time and energy helping his competitors improve their own survival chances. In a competition designed to test individual capability, he had demonstrated something that transcended individual achievement. When the transport ships arrived to collect the competitors, Tom was the only one who seemed reluctant to leave. He had adapted so well to the conditions on Frost 7 that the frozen world had become almost comfortable for him. The other competitors were eager to return to heated ships and medical attention, but the human appeared to be enjoying his final moments in the snow dome he had built. The closing ceremony was unlike anything the Galactic Council had originally planned. They had expected to crown a winner based on superior technology or evolutionary advantages. Instead, they found themselves recognizing something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about what constituted advanced civilization. Council Leader Prime announced Tom as the clear winner of the challenge, but the speech that followed was not about human victory over alien competitors. It was about the discovery that Earth's apparent primitiveness was actually sophisticated wisdom that galactic civilization had somehow lost in its rush toward technological solutions. The advanced species had developed amazing technology that could overcome almost any challenge, but they had lost touch with the natural principles that made such technology possible. They had forgotten that the most elegant solutions were often the simplest ones, and that true intelligence lay not in creating complex systems, but in understanding how simple systems could be combined to achieve complex results. Most surprising to the Council was the human concept of competitive cooperation. Tom had demonstrated that helping others succeed did not diminish his own achievement. In fact, it enhanced it by showing that his knowledge was not just personally effective, but universally applicable. The Terraforming Technology and Council, seat that Earth had competed for, were granted immediately, but with an additional request that amazed Ambassador Riley when she received the message. The Galactic Council wanted to establish exchange programs where human survival experts would teach natural adaptation techniques to other species, while alien technological specialists would share their knowledge with Earth. Tom's victory had revealed that the galaxy's newest member had something valuable to teach civilizations that were thousands of years older. The ice dome that had kept him warm through Frost 7's killing cold became a symbol of human ingenuity. But more importantly, it became a reminder that wisdom often lay in the oldest knowledge rather than the newest innovations. As the competition site was abandoned and Frost 7 returned to its eternal winter, Tom's snow dome remained standing, a monument to the power of working with nature rather than against it. The structure would eventually be covered by drifting snow and become part of the landscape, but the lessons it represented would spread throughout the galaxy, changing how advanced civilizations thought about survival, adaptation, and the true meaning of intelligence.